Welcome to the Ben Wiersma Show on SVK, where we dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion within the food service industry. I'm your host, Ben Wiersma, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation with today's guest. Let's roll the intro. Fantastic. So welcome to the Ben Wiersma Show, where we dive into the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the restaurant space. I'm super excited to have our guest on today, Chef Einav Gefen, who has really started her career 20 years ago as a pastry chef in Tel Aviv, Israel. Chef Gefen has worked at some of the best restaurants and graduated from the Institute of Culinary Education. She founded and became the director of culinary arts program at the Jewish Community Center in Manhattan. Chef has been on television, contributing author on books such as The Art of Cook, professional chef instructor at the Institute of Culinary Education in Manhattan, training aspiring chefs in all aspects of cooking. In 2008, Chef joined Unilever as corporate head chef and was promoted to corporate executive chef in 2016. In this role, Chef led a team of chefs charged with innovation, development, product rejuvenation, consumer and customer activation, and development of global projects. Her 2014 TED Talk is a must-watch, and as well as being on the Food Network's competition show Chopped. Chef Einav has joined Restaurant Associates in October of 2021 as SVP Culinary and Head Innovation Chef. And I'm excited to hear how that is going, Chef. In this role, Chef is overseeing a team of fantastic and talented culinarians driving culinary innovation in the industry at locations such as the American Museum of Natural History, the Guggenheim, a Museum of Fine Art in Boston, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Georgia Aquarium, and many more. And I am so pleased to have Chef with us here today on the show to dive into her career and gain some insight really around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the restaurant space and sustainability as well. So welcome, Chef.
Thank you very much. Wow, hearing all that, I feel old. But yeah, sure.
No, not at all. Not at all. You have an illustrious career, and I'm pleased that you would take the time out of your day to join us on the show and really gain some insight for our viewers. So Chef, I wanted to start off, and I wanted to ask you this question around, having starting your career in Tel Aviv in Israel, what was it like coming to the USA? And how do you think that changed your perspective when it came to cooking and your career?
Well, first and foremost, coming to the US was a dream come true. This is something that was in the works for me for a long time prior to coming, saving money to come here. And I think way somewhere down, I always knew that I belong here. I didn't remember it, but a friend reminded me that when I was a teenager, I said, I want to live in the States. So I thought it only came later. Apparently not. So I think on that end, it was something that was definitely on my bucket list. I did not know coming here if it will work out and I'll end up staying, or that it will be only for a period of time and I will go back to Israel. But 23 years later, I think it's safe to say that I'm staying. It changed my perspective in many, many ways. You come in as a youngster. I was after my army service. I was after working in restaurants for 6 years already, came here to go to culinary school and hopefully start career and life here. But and it's not only the US, it's New York in particular, Manhattan. You come to the number one food city in the world with so many eclectic cultures and diversity in food, and the world is your oyster. So taking all that in, for me was amazing. I'm still walking the city, looking around as if it wasn't 23 years ago that I came at an awe that I'm here. I think it made me a much more humble person, extremely less judgmental. You come in as a youngster, you think you're going to conquer the world, and you realize that there are many people with a lot of knowledge surrounding you, and you have so much to learn. So I think I came here thinking that I know a lot, and I pretty much realized that there is much more that I need to learn, and that's pretty much true to today as well. But it keeps me well grounded.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love how sometimes travel and where we move and our lives, they create this, this perspective that shapes how we do things. So, one of the questions I thought I have to ask was, do you feel, interning, especially, at New York and at Daniel, that shaped your career early on?
Everything shapes your path and in your career. I aim to go to Danielle at the time, again, not knowing if I'm going to end up staying. So my thought was like, I'm going to aim as high as I can. I'm going to reach for the stars at the time that I'm here, because you can always track back. I wanted to learn from the best and work with the best ingredients and work with the best chefs. And even working at Danielle's restaurant with a lot of French chefs, there were a few Israeli chefs and Danielle himself and American chefs. You already have a melting pot, and you learn to recognize different tempos in people. At the end of the day, yes, we cook, we produce food. Of course, we feed others, and of course, this is the core and this is the main. But you're also part of a team, and it's very important to know your team as a team player to make sure that you can be your best. But it's also, who do I need to tiptoe around? Who's my ally? Who's not? So it taught me a lot about food and appreciation to fine dining. But it also, being in a big kitchen with a prep kitchen on the bottom and the execution kitchen on the top, totally different ball game coming from a smaller kitchen with only 4 or 6 people.
Right. Yeah, that's a great story. I love that. So I wanted to get your advice around, what kind of advice would you give, say women, especially, younger women, that are really looking at going after these types of internships? What kind of advice would you give?
It's funny, Ben, that you're asking, because only now, later in my career, do I look back and I look at myself as a female or a woman in the kitchen, realizing a lot of the hurdles that you need to run at the time. You walk the walk, you run the path. You don't have time to evaluate and stop and think and process. It's only, hindsight is always 2020, or hopefully. I think for the most part, there are 2 things. There is just the nature of the business of working the weekends and working the nights and working the holidays, that when you want to start a family, it's a bigger toll on women. And I think that's changing. And I think that's specifically changing after COVID, when many men also were home with their spouses, with their significant others, with their kids, figuring, hey, why do I have to work all those hours? I too want to be home, quality time with my family. So I think that perspective is creeping in, no matter what, your gender is. But at the time, the toll is much higher for a woman. How am I going to work, schlep pots and pans, work this physical work if I'm pregnant, if I have young kids at home? It's much more difficult to balance. And so you have many women veering more into pastry, I think of course by passion, but also by default of just choosing the more reasonable kind of path that still allows you to be in a kitchen. but there is also something that we as females need to remember. We tend to be more careful leaping forward. And I always say that when I speak now, because in retrospect, it's very true. We look at things and we say, okay, I have the 5 years of experience. I have only 4.5, and we're afraid to do the leap forward rather than say, you know what, I'm capable. I'm a fast learner. I'm just as good, and I'll dive in. I always say that for me, when I'm mirroring my decision, I always ask, what's the worst that can happen, right? And if the worst that can happen is this job is not going to work out, or this move was not the right move, then that's all there is. This is really, in the grand scheme of things, not a high price to pay. I'm not going to go hungry. I'm not going to go homeless. It was just potentially a wrong move. So my suggestion, my advice is to evaluate the jobs that you want to have, and not necessarily be so hard on ourselves. If we know we can do it, take the leap and do it. And I think that's the best thing. That's the biggest advice that I can give.
Yeah, and that's a really valuable perspective. Mm-hmm. I like that about pushing for that next, that next challenge or that next hurdle. I think sometimes we can be a bit cautious in life, and if we can really dive forward into that, and not get so caught up, I guess, in our own thinking of things, that can be a big benefit in moving our careers forward and getting to the ultimate, goals that we want to have in life. And in
absolutely, we always say we're our biggest critics, right? Not only female, every person is their biggest critic. So, if you can isolate that criticism for a second and try to zoom out and look at it in a little bit of objective way, maybe the conclusion will be slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. So overseeing, development and innovation, we talked a bit about experiences, but, how has your, past experiences and the things that you've done, how has that really shaped your menu innovation? And I guess, to add to that question, I'd be interested to see how do you think your team's experiences shape those menu innovations?
Great question. And, it's two different parts. I think anything we experience in life shapes innovation. And the most important thing is to be open-minded. As you mentioned, traveling is always, an inspiration source. But and I was very lucky. I traveled from a very early age. My father was a pilot. So, traveling was in my DNA, eating, experiencing different things. But I was very lucky with my time with Unilever, that Unilever enabled me to really explore the world for different reasons, but also explore a lot of foods. And you always know that food is a mirror of a culture. So you can experience a culture, you can appreciate habits and culture just by tasting different foods, even better if you have somebody local to talk to. And slowly it adds to your repertoire of different flavors, spices, ingredients, techniques, smells, aromas, dishes that start building your toolkits into building innovations. But it's also, for people who are not, as lucky as I am to really travel, that's the beauty of living in a major city, is that you have those things accessible. I talked to one of my teammates yesterday. He lives in Queens, and he said, this is a mini universe. You have Greek and Indian and Jamaican and Israelis and Russians, all within, I don't know how many square miles, that you can every day go and try authentic different food. So it's doing diligence and not just going for like, oh, I'm hungry, let me grab something. It's like, wow, let me look into that. I always ask the waiters, what is the specialty? What do they recommend? And then they tell you the story of maybe the ingredient or something else that went in that dish. And every bite is a learning experience. And that's kind of like the stepping stones for what innovation is going to be. Because at the end of the day, at anyone's head, it's going to make sense. The dots will get connected into something. And when it comes to my team, it's the same. I never said that I know everything. I started by saying that I still have a lot to learn. And there is no better way than learning from your peers. We all come from different backgrounds. We all come from a different path. So if you pause and, do a little diligence of asking what somebody else's path is, where their food came from, what do they like to eat, how do they do things, you have a mini school tutorial at your fingertips. And I think that's the importance, going back to why is it important to work as a team, is because when you bring all those experiences together, what an amazing toolkit you can build to really have an innovation that is multi-dimensional and much more complex and can evolve and change. And innovation is not only the type of a dish that you put, the food itself. It can also be how you cook it, or the last minute seasoning that you threw on it, or the story behind it, or the dish you serve it in. So I think those are components of innovation that I personally love. It keeps me pretty much on my toes, and I love hearing everybody's thinking or thoughts about food and what do they think is new, because maybe what I think is new is not new to them, and vice versa. And it's how the snowball starts to roll down the hill.
Yeah, and it's these these meldings of cultures, right? When you say, Queens is its own universe, we see that now happening in the restaurant industry and in everywhere, right? I grew up in a small town, and there was only a limited selection of restaurants when I was a kid, and now I go back there and there's every kind of cuisine you could think of. And so it just shows how it's evolving and changing. It's probably not quite as the universe of Queens, but it's still that innovation for that place, right? And I think that just is how we get exposed, like you said, to cultures. And when we have that lens to see something that's familiar between cultures, I think that's where we grow and we learn from each other, and we all understand each other's stories more, right? And if I know somebody's story, it's a little bit easier to know them, right, through their food,
Absolutely.
through their culture and cuisine. So it's a beautiful story. So what we focus here on the Ben Wiersma Show is really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in restaurants. And I guess in your career you've worked for some big brands, and I guess what would be your best advice for a restaurant that's looking at maybe getting started, with this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, if you had any.
I think it's not only restaurants that are getting started. Well, let me take a step back. I think all restaurants are getting started after COVID. It doesn't matter if you existed before or opening now. I think it was a really difficult time. It still is for our industry. And if you flip it on its head and look at it as an advantage, it's maybe a restart or a kickstart to many establishments, and probably a good time to evaluate who you are as a restaurant and who you want to be. So I think that always has to start with who you are as a restaurant, who your clientele is, to do better, to be more successful. A smart man said that what got us here won't get us there, right? So this is a good time to stop and think, what do we need to do to get us there? And diversity and inclusion, yes, people say, oh, we have to do it, we need to do it. It's not just talking, it's walking the walk. And this is not a check in the box of like, oh yes, I hired a person of color, or I hired another female, and you can check the box of diversity and inclusion. It's not about that. It's about, again, going back to this beautiful mining of ideas and cultures and skill set and stories that at the end can strengthen a restaurant brand, either by translating into a menu, or just by building a stronger team as a back of house. We're all people at the end. I don't care what color you are, what religion you are, what gender you are. At the end of the day, if you strip all those layers away, we're all human beings, and we all come with our own story and our own beautiful food path. And when you build a strong, diverse team, front of us or back of house, and this team also ends up reflecting your clientele, your dining clientele, then you have a whole story. So I think it's very important for every restaurant, every food institution, not to look at diversity and inclusion as the buzzword, the trend, the what I need to do. This is not about, yes, it's the right thing to do. Of course it is, but it's the right thing to do, not because you need to check a box. It's the right thing to do because it's right for your business. And my biggest advice is don't judge. It's we all have our biases, whatever they may be. Bias is a protection system as human beings, and I'm not condemning anyone for their biases, but if we stop and think about our biases and look where they generated and can leap forward from that bias and see the added value that it adds, that it brings to the table for you as a business, as a chef, as a leader, front of house, back of house, it doesn't matter, then the necessity of diversity and inclusion is tenfold, because it adds, it's an easy way to bring depth to an institution, any institution. It's the unlock of a really great team, multicultural team, and just at the end, something that your diners will choose to come and dine at your establishment, because it represents the world significantly more than any just unilateral type of faces that you may see front of back of house.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying there. I get this feeling of it being a holistic approach, right? Inside the restaurant and as well as out in the community. And that representation of, kind of the diversity and of your staff representing that community. I just think that's a beautiful story to tell. And I think restaurants are inherently diverse. We all know that, right? We're all diverse, in the broad sense of the term, but it really is that inclusion and that equity piece, right? It's that voice that you have within the business. And then, are you feeling, that you belong, right? And that's the competitive advantage for acquiring customers and also the staff retention, which I think is at the forefront of a lot of brands and a lot of restaurants right now.
And a pain point, a true pain point now. Yeah.
Huge pain point. And it kind of segues into my next question, which is, we're obviously hearing lots about, the future of the food service industry in terms of labor. We've kind of dived into that, when we look at, this diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, it really is the advantage for building the best possible team. And I know you agree with that. And so, what I kind of wanted to ask you was really around, how does that sustainability piece come into the restaurant industry, and what role do you feel restaurants have to play in terms of, the sustainability, of our planet?
Big role. And I think people that may know my story or may have heard me speak before know that one of the biggest amazing things that I did with Unilever Food Solutions is launch Fair Kitchens, which is a movement to change the culture, first in kitchens, but also, back of house. And we talk a lot, and we give tools for people who want to dive deeper into that. But I think that the foundation of all of this is chefs and restaurants today are not only just chefs and restaurants. This era has long gone, way before COVID, when chefs became celebrities through the Food Network venue and then through social media. Our role as culinarians in the industry became also as leaders, social leaders. And you may impact only your team or only your clientele, but if you have a bigger presence, either on the stage or through social media, you have a bigger reach and a bigger impact with other tier of people. And as such, you have power, and with power comes responsibility. And I think that's why chefs have a huge role to play in driving diversity and inclusion. And as you said, Ben, it's not about who we hire, it's about really leveraging it to something that is an added value to every institution. And reflecting in the society, but also in sustainability. We are on the dovetail of 2 years where sustainability went out the window. Everything is single packed, everything is plastic containers, disposable. I mean, we have probably threw ourselves more than a decade back with all the advantages that we have done with sustainability before, out of necessity for safety. But as we are easing our way into some normality, we need to put it back on the table. And chefs are leaders. I think every chef, every owner, business owner, every chef, if they don't see themselves as a leader, they're missing a big component of the role in the industry. We have a voice, and our voice is being listened to, not only heard. And I think we need to use it to do the right thing, not only the right thing for ourselves and our bottom line financially, but the right thing as people that feed other people and have the ear of other people to really walk the walk. So not only by diversity and inclusion, and tell the story, tell the story of your team. It's not only going to bring recognition to your team and shine some light on the amazing people that help us execute our day to day, which is essentially our dream, but also with sustainability. And I think the biggest thing when I talk to chefs, when I travel through our different accounts and units with the amazing team that we have, sometimes it feels overwhelming because we hear it, and it feels we don't need to boil the ocean. This is small impact, small actions, big impact type of a game. And that's how we need to look at it. And it can be food waste. It can be what we order. It can be starting to reduce little things, attention bad in the refrigerator, and slowly becomes a habit in the kitchen, and it becomes a habit with your team. So yes, the first step may be a little demanding. You need some bandwidth for that, but as you start, even if you reopen, if you establish this as the new ways of working, that's going to start the engine of this big heavy train that needs to move forward.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. I love that conversation around the role that we all play, but especially that influence that we can have through our businesses, and those small actions, right? I like how you said, we can't boil the ocean. We've got to make those small, incremental, impactful steps. I think that's phenomenal advice for lots of things, but especially in terms of this sustainability conversation that's right at the forefront of culture today, right, of our society. So, unfortunately, we're coming to an end, but I do want to say, thank you so much, Chef Einav, for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time out to jump on and speak to us today about your experience. This conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion truly within the restaurant industry and sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, for bringing me on, and mostly thank you for the amazing thing you're doing, shining a light on a much needed to be solved topic.
Fantastic. Thank you. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye, Ben.
Bye. We'll talk soon. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and joining for this episode of the Ben Wiersma Show. Our hope here is that we shine a light on this conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the restaurant industry. And I'm thrilled and excited to be able to join you on a regular basis and be a part of this ongoing conversation as we all strive to do and be better. And with that, thank you for joining. And remember, share food and care for one another.